If you have ever opened a social media app just for a second, and then looked up what felt like 5 minutes later to realize half an hour has gone, you already know that your brain does not treat those little icons on your phone as neutral pixels. They are not just shapes and colors. They are doorways into something your nervous system has cared about for millions of years. Other people. Behind every notification badge and every unread message, your brain imagines a social signal. Someone liked me. Someone disagreed with me. Someone could be angry, impressed, amused, disappointed. Even when you tell yourself you are just checking what's new, a deeper part of you is scanning for signs. Am I safe in the group? Am I visible? Am I being left behind? Those questions are not unique to smartphones. They are ancient. What is new is the scale and speed at which we are now exposed to them. For most of our species' history, the social world, your brain had to track was maybe a few dozen, at most a couple of hundred people. Family, neighbors, allies, rivals, potential mates. Your brain evolved in that context. It built circuits that are very good at reading faces, picking up tone of voice, remembering who did what to whom, and making predictions like, if I say this, what will happen to my place in this little tribe? That is the social brain. Networks that light up when we think about other minds, when we imagine their thoughts, when we feel shame, pride, jealousy, belonging. Those networks developed at a time when reputations traveled slowly, where most feedback about you came through a few familiar mouths, and where you could usually see the whole reaction in someone's eyes. When you pleased your group, you saw smiles, heard laughter, felt hands on your shoulder. When you angered them, you saw frowns, heard silence, felt the physical distance open up. Now when you post something, there is a chance, however small, that it could, in theory, be seen by hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people you will never meet. Most of the time, that does not actually happen, but the possibility hangs there like a low-level voltage. Your social brain, built for a village, is now plugged into a global loudspeaker. The feedback you get in return is compressed into numbers and symbols: likes, hearts, views, shares, comments, follower counts. Instead of a handful of familiar faces reacting to you, you see a shifting wall of strangers' judgments, algorithmically sorted, often delivered the moment you open your eyes in the morning. Your nervous system is trying to interpret what those numbers mean using the same old rules. More approval equals more safety. More disapproval equals more danger. Invisibility feels like a kind of social death. But the environment has changed so much that those rules now produce strange, sometimes painful results. Think about the last time you posted something and then checked back to see how it was doing. Consciously, you may have been curious about whether people liked the content. Underneath, several ancient systems were running. One part of your brain was asking, did the group accept this offering? Another was asking, where do I rank compared to others? Another was scanning for threats. Did anyone misunderstand me, attack me, exclude me? When the numbers were higher than usual, you might have felt a little rush, a mixture of pride, relief, excitement. When they were lower, a different feeling: disappointment, embarrassment, maybe a touch of shame. None of this required anyone to say your name out loud or look you in the eye. Your brain treated the tiny digital signals as if they were real social outcomes, because socially they are. They can affect whether people reply to you, whether they see you in their feeds, whether you are invited into certain online spaces. Your status in these invisible crowds animates very old parts of your biology. From the outside, it is easy to say, they are just numbers, they should not matter. But to your social brain, numbers that stand in for acceptance or rejection matter a lot. In traditional societies, being socially excluded could literally mean death. You lost access to shared food, shared shelter, protection against threats. Today, your survival does not depend on how many likes you get on a post. But the brain has not updated its code to say, views are optional, housing is not actually linked to this. It still reacts to perceived exclusion with stress. Heart rate changes, cortisol rises, circuits associated with physical pain light up. That is why being ignored online can hurt in a way that feels oddly physical: a tightness in the chest, a sinking in the stomach. It is not because you are shallow. It is because the machinery that handles am I in or out is deeply tied to the machinery that handles am I safe or in danger. Social media platforms are built directly on top of this machinery. They turn social approval into a game with visible scores. They speed up the feedback loops. In a village, you might have gotten one or two big pieces of social news in a day. Online, you can get dozens of small bits in a minute. Each one is a micro signal to your social brain. Somebody saw you, somebody ignored you, somebody agreed, somebody mocked you, somebody else is living a life you might want. These signals are not evenly spaced. They come in bursts. A post suddenly gets attention, then dies, then something else pops. That irregular pattern is exactly the kind of unpredictability that dopamine systems find compelling. You do not know when the next rewarding signal will arrive, so you keep checking. Layered on top of this is another ancient dynamic, comparison. We have always compared ourselves to others to figure out where we stand. Are we as skilled, as attractive, as generous, as important? In small groups, comparisons were limited to a finite set of people you could actually see and talk to. Online, you can scroll through highlight reels of tens of thousands of lives in a single week. Vacation photos, promotions, relationships, bodies, talents, homes. Your brain tries to place itself in this endless, shifting ranking, and of course it cannot. The scale is too large, but the attempt leaves residue. You might open an app feeling okay about your day and close it feeling vaguely behind, without any specific event justifying that drop. It is simply that your social brain has been fed hundreds of examples of better, and its conclusion, even if vague, is I am not enough. The paradox is that, in theory, social media should make us feel more connected. We can talk to people across oceans, keep up with distant friends, find niche communities for interests we thought we were alone in. And sometimes, it genuinely does that. Many people have found life-saving support online. But the same structures that allow connection also allow constant, low-grade social comparison and judgment to seep into every spare moment. When you stand in line at a shop, wait for a bus, sit on the toilet, lie in bed, you have the option to open a portal onto a world of other people's curated lives and unfiltered opinions. The spaces that used to be socially neutral, short pauses where your brain could rest or drift, are now crowded with silent strangers. Your social brain, which was built to take those pauses as recovery time, is now on duty almost all the time. There is also the issue of anonymity and scale changing the way people treat each other. In small groups, if you insult someone, you have to see the impact on their face. If you spread a rumor, you remain entangled with its consequences. Online, you can drop a harsh comment and never see the person on the other end. Your social brain, which normally inhibits cruelty by making you feel another's distress, is working through text and avatars instead of eyes and bodies. That distance can make it easier for dehumanizing behavior to slip through. Being on the receiving end of that behavior is not a trivial experience. A rude message from a stranger can linger for days in your nervous system, sparking mini nocebo responses, raised vigilance, tightened muscles, intrusive replay of the words. Again, not because you are weak, but because your threat detection circuits treat hostile words as potential data about your place in the group. All of this raises a big, somewhat uncomfortable question. Are we built for this much connection? Or rather, for this much simulated, quantified, accelerated connection? Biologically, we are social animals. We fall apart in isolation. Loneliness is as dangerous to long-term health as many physical risk factors, so it would be wrong to say less connection is always better. What our nervous systems seem less equipped for is a world in which social input has no clear off switch, where we can always see what others are doing, saying, and thinking, and where our own signals to the group are permanently recorded. The village had boundaries in time and space. Social media extends the village into your bed, your commute, your workplace, your bathroom. The social brain, which once had nights and small daily gaps to reset, now has to rely on your conscious choices to get any rest at all. We can frame this not as a moral panic about screens, but as a design mismatch between ancient wiring and modern tools. The question is not, is social media good or bad, as if it were a single object. It is, how does this particular way of packaging and delivering social information interact with a brain that was tuned for slow, embodied, reciprocal interactions? When we ask it that way, we can get more specific about which aspects are most stressful. The metrics, the pace, the anonymity, the endless comparison, the difficulty of logging off when our loneliness makes us crave exactly the thing that sometimes hurts us. In the next parts, we can look more closely at how specific features of the social brain, our need for belonging, our hatred of rejection, our sensitivity to faces and status and gossip, are being pulled and stretched by feeds and notifications, and what that means for our sense of self in a world where being seen has never been so easy and feeling truly known has never been so hard. If we zoom in a little closer, one of the first things we notice is just how hungry the social brain is for signals of belonging. Long before you ever opened an app, there were circuits in your brain quietly tracking who smiled at you, who turned away, who remembered your name, who forgot you. That tracking is not a luxury. It is a survival function. In evolutionary terms, being woven into a group meant better chances of food, protection, and care when you were sick. Being pushed to the edges meant risk. So your nervous system grew exquisitely sensitive detectors for inclusion and exclusion. They sit in networks that light up when you think about what others think of you, when you feel shame, when you feel pride, when you sense that you are welcome or that you should hide. Those networks do not distinguish between a cold look across a campfire and a cold silence after you send a message into a group chat. Both are read as possible data about your place in the tribe. Social media offers, on the surface, an endless stream of belonging cues. Green dots show you who is here. Typing bubbles show you that someone is about to respond. Scene indicators tell you that your words at least entered another person's awareness. Likes and hearts are stylized versions of nods and smiles. Follows are small invitations. You are in my world now. In group chats and communities, in comment sections and threads, you can see words of support, jokes, shared frustrations. For many people, especially those who feel isolated in their offline lives, these signs are not trivial. They can be the first time someone sees their interests mirrored back, the first time they find others with a similar identity, the first time their pain is met with "me too" instead of confusion. When that happens, the social brain relaxes a little. It receives a clear, warm message. You are not alone. It responds by lowering some of the threat signals that constant loneliness produces. But the very same channels that deliver this soothing can also deliver the opposite. Imagine sending a message into a small group and watching it sit there, unanswered, while others keep talking. Rationally, you know people are busy, distracted in other time zones. But your ancient machinery is not evaluating statistics. It is watching for patterns. Others are responding to each other, but not to me, registers as a kind of micro-exclusion. A single instance might sting and then fade. Dozens or hundreds of such micro-exclusions, scattered across months and different platforms, add up. The brain does not keep a neat spreadsheet. It just builds a vague background sense of how socially safe you are. If that background sense tilts toward "not very," your baseline anxiety rises. You might start reading neutral silences as personal slights, neutral comments as attacks, neutral unfollows as rejection. The social brain, given partial information, often fills in the worst. You can see this most clearly in young people who have grown up with feeds and chats as their default social environment. For them, the line between online and real life is thinner. A group leaving them on read feels less like a miscommunication and more like a direct verdict on their worth. When you are still wiring your identity, external mirrors matter a lot. If those mirrors constantly show you other people laughing together without you, celebrating milestones you have not reached, looking a way you do not look, your developing social brain begins to code other people as a landscape where you are always slightly behind, slightly outside. The result is a peculiar state, surrounded by signals of human activity, but often feeling deeply alone inside them. Then there is the way social media compresses and distorts status. In a small group, status is a multidimensional thing. One person might be strong, another funny, another wise, another skilled with their hands. Different situations give different people prominence. Online, especially on big platforms, those nuances are flattened into a handful of visible metrics: follower counts, engagement numbers, blue checks, trending badges. Your social brain, which once tracked status through rich, contextual cues, who people listened to in a discussion, who others imitated, who was sought out for advice, now sees status represented as tallies. It learns quickly that higher numbers attach more weight to someone's words. It may start to treat your own lower numbers as evidence that your words matter less. This matters because the social brain cares deeply about hierarchy, not in a cartoonish, dominance-obsessed way, but in a practical one. Knowing who has influence in your group helps you predict what will happen if you speak up, disagree, ask for help. In healthy, small communities, hierarchy often contains built-in safety mechanisms: elders who protect, leaders who are accountable, informal rules about kindness. On platforms, hierarchy is largely about visibility. It is entirely possible to have huge reach and little responsibility, or real responsibility and little reach. Your brain keeps trying to map online popularity onto its older model of the important people in my world, and getting confused when those people cannot see you, do not know you, and may not treat you as someone whose feelings they are responsible for at all. This confusion intensifies when you become visible yourself. Even a small burst of attention, one post that travels beyond your usual circle, one thread that goes semi-viral, can feel almost physically overwhelming. Your inbox fills, your notifications explode, strangers weigh in on you. For a moment, the ancient parts of your brain may interpret this as a massive surge in status. You are suddenly being watched by far more minds than you are used to. That can trigger a kind of high, a rush of dopamine and adrenaline, a sense that you matter. When the attention fades, as it almost always does, there can be a come down that feels like a kind of social hangover. The social brain, having tasted a level of visibility that no small group could ever provide, now has to return to something closer to ordinary. That contrast can make everyday interactions feel dull or empty for a while, even if nothing is actually wrong with them. You can see a related pattern in the way many of us now perform small pieces of our lives as possible content. You go to a cafe, see a sunset, cook a meal, and a part of your mind automatically frames it. Could this be a post? How will this look? What caption would fit? Your awareness in those moments is not fully anchored in the experience itself. It is split between living it and imagining how it will be received. The social brain, which has always cared about reputation, what will people say about me when I am not in the room, now has an always-on channel where you can curate what those people see. This can be fun, creative, empowering. It can also add a thin layer of performance over everything, making genuine rest harder. Even private moments can start to feel incomplete if they are not witnessed. Another axis where the social brain is being stretched is time. Before, social interactions mostly happened in bounded windows: gatherings, visits, work hours, shared meals. You arrived, interacted, left. Now, social channels are technically never closed. Your friend can message you from another continent while you are about to sleep. Your group can be active while you are at work. You can wake up to a stack of interactions that happened while you were unconscious. The social brain is not used to having its arena operate 24 hours a day. It evolved with circadian rhythms, periods when the tribe is active together, and periods when everyone, more or less, goes dark. Those dark periods were when your nervous system could fully stand down from social monitoring, because there was simply not much happening without you. With phones on the nightstand, that stand down is no longer automatic. You have to choose it. You have to decide to mute, to turn off, to place the device in another room. Many people do not because they are weak, but because they fear missing something: a crisis, a joke, an opportunity to connect. That fear is another expression of ancient wiring, a worry that the group might move on without you if you sleep too deeply. Ironically, the more you stay available, the more tired and frayed you become, and the less able your social brain is to find satisfaction in the interactions it does get. Everything starts to feel like a blur of half-processed impressions, because the system that should be tracking them is never fully rested. We also have to address the emotional tone of much online social space. In a small face-to-face group, strong emotions are tempered by physical presence. If someone is furious, you see their body strain, their breath change, their eyes flash. There are natural cues that tell others to intervene, soothe, de-escalate. Online, anger and contempt can be poured into words and sent without any of the normal friction that full bodily engagement provides. Posts and comments that are infused with outrage travel faster, because the algorithms that amplify engagement are blind to content. They only see interaction. The social brain, scrolling through this, is exposed to far more second-hand conflict than it would encounter in a lifetime of village living. Even if you are not directly involved, witnessing repeated arguments, pile-ons and shamming can nudge your threat level upward. You begin to expect hostility. You may become more guarded in your own expressions, anxious that one misstep could draw the crowd's fire. At the same time, there is a subtler strain, the constant awareness of other people's suffering. In a village, you would know a few people intensely well and perhaps hear about the hardships of those around you. Online, you can, in the span of 10 minutes, see heartbreaking stories from dozens of strangers in many countries. Your empathy systems, which evolved to respond deeply to a manageable circle of pain, are now pinged by a vast, never-ending stream of distress. Some of this awareness is important. It can motivate solidarity and action, but when it is unfiltered and constant, it can also produce a kind of emotional numbness or burnout. The social brain, overwhelmed, may shut down its caring channels just to protect itself. That shutdown can feel like guilt or apathy. You see something terrible and feel less than you think you should. Once again, an ancient system is doing its best to cope with an environment it was never designed for. We should also look at how all this affects the development of a sense of self. A large part of how you come to know who you are is by seeing how others reflect you back. In childhood and adolescence especially, you absorb others' reactions and build an internal model. I am funny when I do this. I am annoying when I do that. I am lovable, desirable, forgettable, too much, not enough. Before the internet, those mirrors were mostly the people physically around you. Their views were limited, prejudiced, incomplete, but at least they were tied to your actual behavior in shared environments. Now, from a very young age, many people grow up with additional mirrors, strangers reacting only to the slivers of self that algorithms decide to show them. This can create a fragmented identity. You might feel like one person in your body, another in your close relationships, another in your public posts, another in anonymous accounts. The social brain has to juggle all these versions, keeping track of which one is performing in which space. For some, this multiplicity is liberating. They can explore aspects of themselves that would be unsafe or impossible in their offline world. For others, it is exhausting. They lose a sense of solid core. When the feedback from these different selves conflicts, it can trigger deep confusion. If anonymous strangers elevate one version of you and your close people love a different version, which feels more real. If your best performing posts show only your happiest or most successful moments, does the part of you that is tired or sad start to feel like an imposter in your own life? Underneath all this complexity runs a simple, steady truth. The social brain wants coherence. It wants to feel that there is a stable me navigating a somewhat predictable us. Social media, by design, destabilizes both. The me you present can be edited, filtered, switched quickly. The us you address can change from intimate friends to total strangers with one repost. Your brain is doing enormous, often invisible work to keep up. It monitors multiple overlapping audiences, remembers old posts that might resurface, tracks tiny shifts in norms and vocabulary, all so that you do not accidentally step outside what your current perceived group will tolerate. That constant monitoring uses resources. It is partly why many people report feeling socially drained even if they have spent the day physically alone. None of this means that online life is purely harmful. It simply means that if you feel unusually tired, sensitive, jealous, lonely, or on edge after spending time in your feeds, you are not malfunctioning. Your social circuits are reacting as they were built to react, given the input they are getting. A brain tuned for a village is now trying to survive a 24/7 global amphitheater. That mismatch shows up as symptoms: anxious checking, difficulty resting, stronger need for external validation, an ache that no number of likes seems to fill. The ache is not a sign that you are doomed. It is a sign that a need for deep, slow, reciprocal connection is being fed largely with fast, thin, asymmetrical connections. If we want to use these tools without letting them hollow out our social selves, we first have to name what they are doing to that social self. Not in an alarmist way, but in a clear, kind way. This is a lot for a human nervous system. It is okay if you are not entirely okay with it. In the next part, we can begin to explore what kinds of boundaries, habits, and reframes might let you stay in touch with the world without asking your ancient social brain to operate in permanent overdrive, and how to rebuild, even in a wired age, some spaces that feel more like a circle of humans around a fire and less like a spotlight aimed at your face. If you look at social media not as apps, but as environments built around your social brain, some of the design choices start to look very targeted. One of the most powerful is the feed itself, an endless column of other people's lives, opinions, and faces. From a technical point of view, it is just a list that can be scrolled. From the brain's point of view, it is a stream of social signals without natural stopping points. In a conversation around a real table, there are pauses. People leave, someone changes the subject, your body gets tired, and you go home. The social brain uses these breaks to close loops. That interaction is done, that story is over for now. A feed, by design, does not do that. It is bottomless. Each time you pull, more appears. Your prediction machinery quickly learns that a small effort thumb flick yields a variable reward, something funny, upsetting, inspiring, infuriating, attractive. That variable reward pattern is the same kind that makes gambling machines compelling. Your dopamine system cannot easily predict when the next hit will come, so it keeps you sampling. What makes this particularly intense for the social brain is that the hits are not just random colors or abstract points, they are social cues. A smiling face, a clever joke, a group of friends together, a piece of news that says your group is under threat, an argument that invites you to pick a side. Each one of these items is a tiny invitation to simulate other minds. When you see a post, you often subconsciously imagine the poster's intention. Why did they share this? What does it say about them? You imagine the audience's reaction. Will they like this? Will they judge? And you place yourself in that scene. Would I fit in there? What would I say? This kind of simulation is what the social brain is built to do. But in offline life, you might do it deeply for a few people a day. In a half hour of scrolling, you can do it shallowly for hundreds. The simulation network does not know how to tell your feed, I am at capacity now. Stop giving me people to think about. It keeps trying. And the result can be a strange mix of mental fatigue and emotional residue. Many small impressions, none fully processed, all jostling for space. Notifications add another layer. A notification is not just information delivered. It is a designed interruption that says, social change has occurred in your absence, update now. Your brain treats changes in social status, relationships, and group norms as high priority signals. Historically, if something happened in the group while you were away, an argument, a decision, a shift in leadership, it mattered a lot. You needed to catch up to avoid saying the wrong thing or being caught off guard. Notifications reuse that urgency. A red dot, a buzz, a count on an icon. Your nervous system cannot help but treat them as something about my standing in the tribe may have shifted. Even when you know rationally that it is just another like or a low-stakes comment, a subtle tension remains. Until you check, part of you is unsettled. That tension is what keeps your hand drifting toward the phone, even when you decided not to. Consider group chats. They can be lifelines, shared spaces of memes and support, but they can also become sources of pressure. When a chat is active, messages accumulate quickly. If you step away for an hour, you might return to dozens of unread lines. The social brain, seeing that pile, may feel a familiar anxiety. I have missed something important. The group has moved on without me. I am out of sync. You might then skim or speed read, not because you care deeply about each message, but because you are trying to restore alignment. This can turn even downtime into a low-level chore, keeping up with the ongoing stream so as not to fall behind socially. Over days and months, that feeling of needing to catch up with collective conversation can make rest less restful. A quiet evening alone is not fully quiet if you are also mentally tracking several ongoing threads. Algorithms that determine what you see also interact with the social brain in important ways. They tend to prioritize content that generates strong engagement, and strong engagement is often driven by emotion: outrage, awe, desire, fear, moral disgust. That means your feed is not a neutral cross-section of what your network thinks. It is a curated highlight reel of what triggers reactions. The social brain, which takes its cues about what our group cares about from what it sees and hears, can come away with a distorted sense of the tribe's emotional climate. If your feed is full of anger, you may unconsciously conclude that your group is constantly under attack or at war, even if your immediate offline surroundings are relatively calm. If your feed is full of achievements and celebrations, you may conclude that everyone is always thriving except you, even if many of those people are struggling privately. In both cases, your nervous system is trying to build a model of us from skewed data, and then using that model to decide how safe you are and how you should behave. There is also the phenomenon of context collapse, which social media researchers use to describe what happens when many different audiences are merged into one unclear blob. In physical life, you behave differently with your family, your close friends, your colleagues, strangers in a shop. Each context has its own norms. Online, one post can be seen by all of these groups at once, plus strangers. Your social brain, which is used to adjusting its tone and self-disclosure depending on who is in the room, is faced with an impossible task. Speak in a way that will be acceptable to everyone you know plus unknown others. That impossibility can create a constant, vague self-censorship. You may find yourself writing and deleting, softening your opinions, avoiding certain topics, or alternatively, leaning into a caricatured version of yourself that you hope will work across audiences. Either way, the simple act of saying anything becomes more loaded. The tribe is too big, too fragmented, and your prediction machinery is stretched thin trying to anticipate reactions. All of this helps explain why interactions that seem small on the surface can feel huge inside. Being unfollowed by someone you know, having a post flop when you hoped it would land, seeing people you like all at an event where you were not invited, these can produce outsized emotional ripples. Your rational mind might say, "It is just an app. This does not matter." Your social circuits disagree. They treat these events as indicators of changing inclusion and status. You can feel that disagreement as a split. Part of you annoyed at your own sensitivity, part of you genuinely aching. That ache is often layered. Current micro-exclusions stir up older memories of not being chosen, not being seen, not being enough in offline childhood and adolescence. The feed becomes not just a place where new social information enters, but also a stage where old wounds are quietly reactivated. There is another dimension: the way online spaces encourage us to organize ourselves into tribes defined not only by geography or family, but by beliefs, aesthetics, interests, and identities. On the positive side, this allows people to find their people across great distances, which can be powerfully validating. On the more precarious side, it can turn every belief or preference into a potential badge of belonging or exclusion. Your stance on a topic, your taste in media, your choice of words, all can become markers of which tribe you are in. The social brain, always hungry for clear signs of us and them, likes this clarity at first. It feels good to know where you stand. But vivid tribal lines also mean more opportunities to feel like you are failing your own side or being attacked by another. A stray comment can draw in a swarm of correction from your nominal allies or hostility from your nominal opponents. The sense that you are always on stage, in front of multiple tribes, can make self-expression feel risky. The speed at which reputations can rise and fall online adds its own tension. In a small group, it takes time to build or lose trust. There are stories, conversations, shared history. Online, one screenshot, one out-of-context clip, one mistaken impression can travel faster than any attempt to explain. Your social brain is deeply sensitive to the idea that one mistake could get me cast out. When that idea is reinforced by real examples of pile-ons and cancellations, even if they are rare compared to the total volume of posts, your nervous system may start to assume that you are constantly one misstep away from disaster. That assumption can heighten vigilance, making every interaction feel like a test. Over time, that vigilance is exhausting. It can drain the joy out of connecting, turning what should be a source of nourishment into another arena where you must defend your right to exist. We can also look at how the social brain handles absence and ambiguity in these spaces. When someone stops responding to your messages, or goes quiet on their account, or seems to be active with others but not with you, your mind naturally starts to fill in reasons. Maybe they are busy. Maybe they are struggling. Maybe they are mad. Maybe they never really liked you. The social brain leans toward explanations that protect against surprise, which often means anticipating rejection. If I assume they do not care, I will not be hurt if they confirm it later. Unfortunately, living in that assumption hurts anyway. It places you in a constant state of mild social grief over relationships that may not actually be broken. Without the anchors of face-to-face contact, tone, eye contact, body language, it is harder to test those assumptions. You might hesitate to ask directly for fear of seeming needy. So ambiguity lingers, and the social brain, which hates unfinished stories, stews. All of this may sound very bleak, but it has a hopeful implication. Many of the painful reactions you have to online life are not signs that you are uniquely fragile or malfunctioning. They are signs that sensitive, deeply social equipment is doing exactly what it was built to do in a context that magnifies its inputs. Your nervous system is not making a category error when it cares about what happens on your screen. The category of social reality now legitimately includes those spaces. The problem is not that you are taking them too seriously, in some moral sense, but that they have been designed to capture more of your social seriousness than they deserve. If the issue is a mismatch between design and wiring, then one path forward is not to expect your wiring to change, but to change how, when and why you expose it to these designs. That does not necessarily mean quitting everything and moving to the woods. It can mean treating your social brain like something that needs care, the way you might treat your joints or your sleep. You do not blame your knees for hurting when you run too much on concrete. You adjust how you run, where, and how often. In the next part, we can start to explore what that kind of care might look like. Practical boundaries, small shifts in how you interpret signals, and ways of deliberately cultivating slower, deeper forms of connection, so that your ancient social machinery has somewhere to rest besides the endless, flickering stage of the feed. If we start from the idea that your social brain is not a problem to fix but a piece of sensitive equipment to care for, the question changes. Instead of, how do I stop being so affected by all this? It becomes, how do I build a life where this equipment is used in ways it can actually handle? That shift matters. When you treat your reactions to social media as evidence of personal weakness, you are likely to respond with scolding and denial. Just stop caring. Just be stronger. Just log off. When you treat them as signals from an overworked system, you are more likely to respond with boundaries and design. Where can I reduce load? Where can I create buffers? Where can I feed this system the kind of social input it was built for instead of only what the apps serve by default? One of the simplest and hardest levers is time. Your social circuits can tolerate intensity if they also get genuine breaks. The problem with the phone world is not only how stimulating it is, but how it erases natural pauses. If you check your feeds first thing in the morning, last thing at night, in every line and every quiet moment, your social brain never fully goes offline. It naps with one eye open. You can begin to change this not by adopting heroic digital detoxes that you cannot sustain, but by carving out small, consistent off-duty windows. For example, the first half hour after you wake up, the last half hour before you sleep, one meal a day, a weekly block of a few hours where your phone is in another room. In those windows, you are not just not online. You are telling your nervous system, for this slice of time, nothing about my social standing can change in a way I need to respond to. At first, that will feel itchy, as if you are neglecting some invisible duty. If you keep at it, the itch often softens into something closer to relief. Another lever is the way you treat notifications. Right now, for most people, their phone is configured as if every social event is urgent. The same buzz announces a close friend in crisis, a random like, a promotional email, a distant acquaintance posting a story. Your social brain cannot tell the difference until you look, so every buzz is a mini jump. One act of care is to separate, as much as the tools allow, the truly urgent from the merely new. That might mean turning off all non-essential notifications and leaving only calls or messages from a very small inner circle. It might mean setting specific times of day when certain apps are allowed to interrupt you and keeping them silent the rest of the time. It might mean using do not disturb modes more aggressively than feels comfortable at first. You are not doing this because you do not care about people. You are doing it because you care enough to want to be more fully present when you do respond, instead of responding from a state of constant startle. Curation is another form of protection. Your feed is not just what the world is like. It is a stream you can, to some extent, redirect. If you notice that certain kinds of accounts consistently leave you feeling worse, perpetually angry commentary, relentlessly polished lifestyles, subtle humble brags that trigger comparison, you can treat unfollowing or muting them not as a moral judgment but as hygiene. Just as you would not spend hours in a room that constantly pumped in irritating noises, you do not have to keep voluntarily injecting those patterns into your social brain. Conversely, you can deliberately follow accounts that model the kinds of interactions your nervous system finds less toxic. People who speak honestly without performative drama, communities that encourage curiosity instead of attack, spaces where imperfection is visible. None of this makes your feed a utopia. It does shift the emotional climate away from permanent storm. There is also the question of how often you step into stage mode versus circle mode. Stage mode is when you are broadcasting to an indistinct crowd, posting, performing, watching metrics. Circle mode is when you are engaged with a small, defined group, a few friends in a chat, a voice call, a private group that actually knows you. Both have their place. The trouble comes when almost all of your online social energy goes into stage mode. Your social brain spends most of its time trying to manage impression and status, and very little time resting in the sense of being known. You can rebalance this by consciously prioritizing small circles. If you feel the impulse to share something, you might ask, would this feel better as a message to 3 people who truly get me than as a post to hundreds who barely know me? Often, the deeper need is not be seen by more, but be seen more fully by a few. Embodiment is another antidote to the disembodied grind of feeds. Social media interactions happen mostly in your head and fingertips. Your eyes, posture, and breath sit in the background, often neglected. Over time, that can make social stimulation feel strangely floaty and ungrounded, like living slightly above your own life. You do not have to abandon online spaces to counter this. You can pair them with deliberately embodied practices that remind your social brain that relationships are not only pixels. Having regular face-to-face time with at least one person, walking with a friend without phones, doing something with your hands, cooking, playing an instrument, drawing while you talk. Even paying attention to your breath and body while reading a message, all of these send the signal. I exist in a body, not just as an avatar. That signal helps your nervous system calibrate the importance of online signals against the backdrop of concrete reality. Then there is comparison. You cannot completely switch off the part of your mind that measures you against others. It is part of how we learn and orient. But you can shift what you compare and how you interpret the comparisons. When you see a post showing a polished moment from someone's day, you can gently remind yourself that you are comparing your full backstage to their highlight frame. That is not a moral insight. It is a factual one. You do not know what their kitchen looked like 10 minutes before the photo, how they slept last night, what they cried about last week. You only know the thin slice they chose to show. Your social brain will still feel the tug of "they are ahead of me," but that tug will be anchored in a more realistic story. They are ahead of me in this one image, which is not the full story of either of us. Over time, repeating that adjustment can soften the sharpest edges of envy into something closer to inspiration or neutrality. You can also experiment with what you offer into the stream. If you only ever post your own polished moments, your nervous system gets caught on both sides of the comparison game. You become a source of others' illusions and a prisoner of your own. Allowing occasional glimpses of the unpolished parts, not in a forced, performative vulnerability way, but simply in small, honest details, can make your online self feel more continuous with your offline self. It is a way of telling your social brain, we are allowed to exist here as actual humans, not just as brands. That, in turn, makes it less catastrophic when someone responds imperfectly. If your image is not totally dependent on perfection, small dents hurt less. Another practical area is how you handle missing out. FOMO is partly about events themselves, but it is also about how your prediction machinery handles absence. When you see others together without you, your brain may jump straight to "they do not like me, I am being left behind. Everyone else is living a better life." Those explanations sting, but they feel safe in a twisted way because they are definitive. Curiosity feels less safe. It leaves open many possibilities, scheduling quirks, different social circles, misunderstandings, structural barriers. Practicing curiosity means pausing when you feel the FOMO spike and mentally generating more than one explanation. That looks fun. I wish I were there. There are probably multiple reasons I am not. This hurts, and it does not automatically mean I am worthless. It is not a comforting mantra. It is a more accurate map. Accuracy, even when it does not feel soothing, is kinder to your nerves in the long run than catastrophizing. We also have to talk about the pull to constantly keep up, not only with content, but with every notification and thread. One way to loosen that pull is to accept, consciously, that you will miss things and that this is not a disaster. In a village, you did not hear every word spoken in every corner. You missed jokes, conversations, moments, yet you were still part of the group. Online culture subtly suggests that being truly engaged means seeing everything. That is impossible. Deciding which spaces you will follow closely and which you will let flow past without guilt is a form of social triage. Maybe you fully keep up with one group chat and treat others as drop-in when you have energy. Maybe you follow a smaller number of accounts deeply instead of skimming hundreds. The idea is to give your social brain fewer open loops to track, so that it can actually digest the interactions it does have. Boundaries around conflict are another form of care. Being vaguely aware of every debate and outrage in your extended network keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic arousal without giving you any real way to intervene. You can decide that there are certain kinds of threads you simply do not read, not because you do not care about the underlying issues, but because consuming them in that format does not actually make you more effective or compassionate. It only leaves you rattled. You can choose a limited number of topics where you will engage in good faith discussions and let the rest pass. You can remember that, for most large-scale arguments, your presence or absence in the comments makes little difference to the outcome, but a big difference to your stress level. Caring about the world does not require bathing constantly in its most chaotic expressions. All of these adjustments live on one side of the equation, reducing unnecessary stress on your social brain. The other side is increasing the amount of nourishment it gets from the kinds of connection it was built for. Small, reciprocal, embodied, repeated interactions where you are more than a profile. That might mean investing more deliberately in a handful of offline relationships, even if they feel less glamorous than your online circles. It might mean initiating small rituals, weekly calls, shared meals, regular walks. These do not earn visible metrics. They do not scale, but they give your nervous system something that no number of likes can replicate, a felt sense of belonging that does not depend on constant performance. The point of all this is not to draw a sharp line between good real life and bad online life. For many people, the internet is where they found their first sense of belonging, where they can be honest in ways they cannot offline. The aim is subtler, to make your digital social world less like a slot machine and more like a series of rooms you can enter and leave with intention. Rooms where your social brain can relax at least some of the time, where you are not always on stage, where metrics are not the only measure of connection. In the final part of this exploration, we can step back and gather the pieces. What it means to accept that you are, and always will be, a creature who cares deeply about what others think. How to carry that fact into a world of feeds without drowning in it. And how to build a story about yourself that is not entirely written by numbers on a glowing glass rectangle. If we start from the blunt, unromantic truth that you are a social animal, a lot of things that look like personal failures begin to make more sense. You are not built to be indifferent to what other people think. You are not wired to be perfectly self-contained, serenely unaffected by invitations, silences, praise, or criticism. Your brain grew inside a body whose survival depended, for most of history, on being accepted by a group small enough to fit around a fire. Caring about inclusion, status, reputation, and belonging is not a glitch. It is part of the core operating system. The feeds in your phone did not invent that vulnerability. They simply discovered it, amplified it, and wrapped business models around it. Once you see that, the question, "Why do I care so much about this stupid app?" becomes less accusing and more honest. Of course you care. When a post does well, it tickles the same circuits that once registered a circle of faces laughing at your joke. When you are ignored, it pricks the same circuits that once tracked who turned away when you approached. Your nervous system does not distinguish between village gossip and online engagement as sharply as you might like. Both are streams of information about your place in a social world. The difference is that one world was bounded and reciprocal, the other is global and asymmetrical. You were designed for the first and are living in the second. Some of your discomfort is simply that mismatch made visible. That mismatch shows up in many small ways. You might find yourself refreshing a page again and again, not because you expect anything life-changing to appear, but because a part of you is scanning the horizon. Any news from the tribe? You might catch yourself rehearsing replies in your head long after a conversation ended, as if you could retroactively fix the impression you made. You might feel a small wave of shame when your story views are lower than usual, as if you had thrown a party and no one came. These reactions can feel childish when you look at them from the outside. They are not. They are the echoes of a system that once needed to be exquisitely tuned to shifts in tiny groups, now trying to make sense of silent metrics and invisible audiences. If you respond to that system with contempt, "Why am I like this? Why am I so needy? Why can't I just not care?" you add a second layer of pain. The first layer is the pang of exclusion, comparison, or overexposure. The second is the feeling that you are weak for having that pang at all. Your social brain hears both messages. The world is unsafe and you are ridiculous for finding it unsafe. It tightens further. The alternative is not to pretend that you do not care. It is to care with your eyes open. To say, "Of course this stings, my brain was built to notice these things." That does not mean the situation is as dire as the feeling suggests. That does not mean I have to let this app define my worth. Part of caring with open eyes is learning to separate signal from noise. Not everything that happens on a screen is an accurate report on your standing in the world. Some interactions really do matter. A sincere message from someone you love, a conversation that deepens a friendship, a small community that sees a part of you your offline life cannot hold. Those are real food for the social brain. Other interactions are more like empty calories, a stranger's offhand insult, a random burst of attention from people who will never think of you again, a like from someone whose face you would not recognize on the street. Your nervous system reacts to all of them because it cannot easily tell in real time who is important and who is not. That is where your deliberate mind can step in and say, gently, this one we digest, that one we let pass. You might picture your attention as a kind of table in a small room. Only a few things can be laid out there and examined at once. Each notification, each post, each comment is knocking at the door, asking for a place on the table. In the absence of any conscious policy, the loudest or most recent knock gets in. Over time, that means your table is crowded with the most provocative, emotionally charged, algorithmically boosted pieces of your social world rather than the most meaningful ones. You end up turning over in your hands a stranger's sarcasm instead of your friend's quiet kindness, a viral clip instead of your sibling's message, a number on a screen instead of the look in someone's eyes earlier that day. The room feels busy but strangely unsatisfying. A small act of self-respect is to decide who gets a guaranteed seat at that table. Maybe it is a handful of people whose opinions about you actually shape your life. Maybe it is one or two communities where you consistently feel like a full human instead of a performance. Maybe it is your own felt sense of how you moved through the day. When a new social input arrives, you can, at least sometimes, ask, does this belong at the table with those things? If the answer is no, you do not have to slam the door. You can simply nod at the knock and let it fade in the hallway. You saw the comment, you registered the like, you noticed the view count. You are not obliged to sit with them for hours. Another part of living with your social brain in this era is recognizing that your online self is a tool, not the whole of you. The version of you that appears in feeds and chats is necessarily an edited slice. Certain interests, tones, and images that happen to fit the shapes your chosen platforms reward. That slice can be honest and important, but it is never complete. Problems arise when the slice starts to feel like the main version and the rest of you, the parts that are boring, undecided, unphotogenic, offline, starts to feel like background noise. Your social brain, watching which version of you gets the most reaction, may begin to treat the backstage as less real. You may find yourself thinking of your life in terms of what could be posted rather than what is lived. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the creative side of self-presentation. Humans have always decorated themselves, told stories about themselves, chosen how to appear. The question is not whether to perform, but whether there is still a self underneath who feels solid when the lights are off. One way to protect that self is to cultivate spaces where no metrics are attached to your presence. Conversations that are not recorded. Shared experiences that no one photographs. Hobbies you do without posting about them. Thoughts you write down only for yourself. These do not need to be separate from your online existence. They can run alongside it. Their function is to remind your social brain that some parts of your identity do not depend on distant eyes or numbers. We also need to talk about outrage and despair. When you scroll through feeds long enough, you receive not only personal social signals but a constant drip of collective emotion. Anger about politics, grief about disasters, panic about trends, waves of shamming and defending. Your social brain interprets much of this as information about the tribe's mood. If the tribe seems perpetually enraged and terrified, your nervous system will prepare for danger, even if your immediate physical surroundings are quiet. You may feel compelled to stay plugged in, as if lowering your vigilance would be irresponsible. At the same time, the sheer volume of suffering on display can make you feel tiny and useless. Caught between urgency and helplessness, you sit in a kind of frozen anguish, doom scrolling because stopping feels like abandonment and acting feels impossible. It might help to remember that your capacity for effective care is finite and local, while your capacity for exposure is nearly infinite. The feeds let you see almost everything, but you cannot fix almost everything. That mismatch creates a brutal no-win situation if you treat every post as a personal summons. A more sustainable stance is to choose a few domains where you will invest real energy, issues, communities, people where your actions, time, or money can matter, and allow yourself to remain relatively uninformed or unengaged with the rest. That does not mean you do not care about those other things in a moral sense. It means you accept that your nervous system and your life are not big enough to hold the entire world's pain in continuous real time. On the scale of your own day-to-day life, some of the most powerful moves are quiet ones. Leaving your phone in another room while you sleep. Letting a message wait 10 minutes before you answer instead of leaping instantly. Closing an app at the first sign that your scrolling has turned into a trance rather than waiting until you are done, because the feed is never done. Sending one honest, kind message to someone you actually know instead of posting something vague to everyone. Declining to read the comments on certain kinds of posts, not because you fear disagreement, but because you know from experience that the cost to your social brain is too high for what you gain. None of these gestures will make the platforms benign. They will not stop you from ever feeling jealousy, shame, anger, or loneliness about something that happens online. They will not magically detach your self-worth from all metrics. What they can do is change the ratios. Fewer hours spent in environments designed as emotional slot machines. More minutes spent in interactions where your nervous system receives the kinds of cues it can digest. Steady attention, shared laughter, familiar voices, moments of being seen in your full context. It is also worth noticing that some of your most painful online experiences may have taught you something you can use. The sting of being ignored might have clarified which relationships were more fragile than you thought, and which ones remained solid. The discomfort of performing constantly may have pushed you to ask what you actually enjoy doing when nobody is watching. The exhaustion of trying to keep up with every conversation may have highlighted which spaces genuinely feed you and which simply siphon your time. Your social brain learns not only from reward but from overload. If you can meet that learning with curiosity instead of only with shame, it can become part of how you recalibrate. Try for a moment to imagine a version of your life where you still use these tools, but on your terms. Your phone is not the first and last thing your social circuits see each day. Your feed is pruned enough that you can scroll for 10 minutes without feeling like the worst or best person alive. You still feel twinges of envy and fear, but you catch them sooner and know how to step away before they spiral. There are a few people with whom you regularly share unfiltered thoughts, in voice or in person, and those conversations matter to you more than public metrics. Some evenings end with you aware of your own body, tired, breathing, here, rather than only aware of what everyone else is doing. That picture is not a utopia. You would still be living in a world of glowing rectangles, still carrying a social brain that flinches when someone withdraws and lights up when someone welcomes you. You would still have days where you lose hours to mindless scrolling and then feel hollow. The difference is that you would be relating to those patterns as phenomena to observe and manage, not as verdicts on your character. Instead of thinking, I am broken because I am attached to this, you might think, of course I am attached. This is powerful for my wiring. I will need structure and kindness to handle it. That shift in internal tone sounds small. It is not. Your social brain listens to how you talk about it. If you are always calling it weak, needy, stupid, it learns that you are not a safe person to be vulnerable with. If you are firm but compassionate, yes, you care. Yes, we are going to log off now anyway, it begins to trust you. At the end of all this, we are left with a paradox. Social media really can bring genuine connection, information, creativity, and opportunity into your life. It can also quietly erode your ability to feel at home in your own skin. Your nervous system is not strong enough to be untouched and not fragile enough to be hopeless. It is responsive. It will change based on what you repeatedly do. That is both the bad news and the good news. The bad news is that you cannot bathe your social brain endlessly in comparison, outrage, and ambiguity without consequences. The good news is that every boundary you draw, every deep conversation you choose over shallow broadcasting, every hour you give back to offline experience is also a kind of training. Training for what? For a life where being a person among other people is complicated, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, and not entirely mediated by algorithms. For a sense of self that is informed by others' eyes but not owned by them. For an ability to step away from the stage and into a circle, even if that circle is small. For the muscle of remembering, in the middle of a feed that never ends, that there is a floor under your feet and a body around your mind, and that not all important things can be captured in a screenshot. You will still refresh more often than you mean to. You will still read things that hurt. You will still sometimes chase numbers as if they were air. When that happens, you do not have to start the self-blame monologue again. You can simply notice, my social brain got pulled further into the crowd than it can comfortably handle. What is one small thing I can do, right now or today, to bring it back towards something more human-sized? Send a voice message to a friend. Step outside and feel the actual weather. Sit on the edge of your bed with your phone face down and take 10 slow breaths. None of those actions will impress an algorithm. All of them send a quiet signal inward. There is more to my life than this rectangle. If you remember only one thing from this whole exploration, let it be that caring about how you appear to others is not the problem. Letting that care be orchestrated entirely by systems that do not know you and do not love you is. You are allowed to want to be seen. You are allowed to enjoy being liked, to feel bruised when you are not. You are also allowed to decide that the final word on your worth is not whatever your feeds did in the last 24 hours. Somewhere beneath the numbers and the avatars, there is still that older scene, a finite group of humans, in a finite place whose lives actually touch yours. Feeding that scene, slowly, imperfectly, repeatedly, is the work that your social brain was made for. The rest is noise you can learn with practice to turn down.